In the heart of France lies a village that was never rebuilt. A place where bicycles still lean against burned-out railings, where rusted clocks no longer tick, and school books are frozen in ash. It was a peaceful village. No weapons, no soldiers. And yet, in just a single afternoon, 642 lives were erased. This is not just a story of war. It's a story of silence, of questions left unanswered, and of a survivor who lived to tell the tale. This is the story of Oradour-sur-Glane. The past doesn't sleep. It lingers. In ash and iron, in whispers behind ruined walls, buried in silence, are stories left untold, echoes of those who vanished, voices lost to time. But the archive remembers. This is where history breathes again. This is archived stories, because some stories were never meant to be forgotten. On June 10th, 1944, just 4 days after the Allied landings in Normandy, a small village in central France falls eerily silent, not from peace, but from the stillness that follows a massacre. Oradour-sur-Glane, a place where time was frozen by fire, gunpowder, and the weight of human cruelty. The town did not vanish because of a bomb. It wasn't erased by disease or swallowed by nature. What happened here was deliberate, cold, and for decades unspoken. Oradour-sur-Glane was a quiet commune in the Haute-Vienne region of France. Surrounded by green fields and gently rolling hills, it was the kind of place where time felt unhurried. In 1944, it held about 650 residents. Farmers, shopkeepers, children who played in the square, and families who gathered for evening meals. Despite the Nazi occupation of France, Oradour had seen little direct violence. Life went on cautiously under the ever-present weight of war. But for the most part, it remained untouched, innocent. The villagers maintained a sense of routine. The post office remained open. The local tram line connecting Oradour to Limoges still passed through the town, ferrying people and parcels. Market days were still observed, children continued to attend school, and the church, St. Martin's, remained the beating heart of the town. On June 10th, 1944, a Saturday, members of the SS Panzer Division Das Reich were making their way north through France, ordered to suppress resistance movements that were gaining strength in the wake of the Allied landings. This division had already left its mark across southern France. Summary executions, retaliatory burnings, and brutal reprisals against any community suspected of aiding the resistance. They were tired, frustrated, and embittered by recent ambushes from partisans. That day, a detachment led by SS Sturmbannführer Adolf Diekmann approached Oradour-sur-Glane. They had received intelligence, or so they claimed, that a high-ranking German officer had been captured by the resistance and taken to Oradour. Later, it would be debated whether this intelligence was accurate or simply a pretext. The SS entered the town early in the afternoon. They were calm, methodical. They called for everyone to gather in the village square. It was, they claimed, a simple identity check. The townspeople, unarmed and unaware, complied. By early afternoon, nearly the entire population was assembled. The men were separated from the women and children. The former were divided into smaller groups and taken to barns, garages, and sheds scattered around the town. The women and children were herded into the village church. No one resisted. Why would they? The soldiers gave no sign of hostility. Many villagers believed it was merely an inconvenience. They had no idea it was the beginning of their final hours. What happened next was not chaos. It was calculation. At around 3 p.m., the men were executed. The SS opened fire, but they aimed low, at the legs. The victims collapsed, crippled but still alive. Then the buildings were set ablaze. Fire finished what bullets had not. In the church, the horror was equally methodical. An incendiary device was placed near the altar. When it ignited, thick smoke filled the sanctuary. Women screamed. Mothers shielded their children. Then, through the stained glass windows, the soldiers opened fire. Only one woman, Marguerite Ruffenche, managed to escape. She climbed through a sacristy window, injured, and crawled into a nearby garden, where she remained hidden until the Nazis left. Marguerite Ruffenche was 47 years old when she witnessed the unimaginable. She had been herded into the village church with more than 400 women and children. When the explosion tore through the altar and smoke began to fill the nave, panic broke out. People screamed, babies cried, mothers tried to protect their children with their bodies. In the chaos, Marguerite made a decision to run. She climbed up behind the altar and hoisted herself through a narrow sacristy window. As she slipped through the frame, bullets whizzed past her. She was hit in the leg, but managed to tumble into a garden behind the church. She lay there, bleeding, surrounded by hedges, hidden among flowers scorched by the heat. She could hear gunfire, then silence, then fire, then only the distant hum of wind and flame. Marguerite remained there until nightfall. When she emerged, she was the only known adult survivor from inside the church. In later years, she gave her testimony, her voice quivering but firm. She spoke not for herself, she said, but for the mothers who could not, for the children who never grew up. By nightfall, Oradour-sur-Glane was no longer a village. It was a graveyard. 642 people were murdered. 205 of them were children. The youngest just a few weeks old. The SS looted the village before leaving. They stole jewelry, watches, and valuables. They also tried to erase the evidence, but the destruction was so thorough, so complete, that it spoke for itself. In the days that followed, the French resistance returned. What they found was beyond comprehension. Blackened stone walls, skeletal remains, melted church bells. The air still carried the smell of smoke and death. When General Charles de Gaulle visited the site, he was struck by the magnitude of the atrocity. He made a decision. Oradour-sur-Glane would never be rebuilt. It would remain in ruins, a national memorial, a warning. News of the massacre spread slowly, filtered through underground networks, Allied radio, and whispered rumors. When it finally reached London and then Washington, it was met with disbelief. Some wondered if the reports were exaggerated. How could such a thing happen to an undefended village? The Allies included references to Oradour in their propaganda broadcasts, reminding listeners of what tyranny looked like. In France, the resistance became further galvanized. Recruiting surged. Small towns began hiding their young men, wary of what had happened to Oradour. After the war, Oradour became a symbol, not just of Nazi brutality, but of the moral question that would haunt Europe for decades. How do we reconcile civilization with such barbarity? In Germany, the massacre forced a reckoning. A handful of former SS men faced justice, but the silence of others, neighbors, witnesses, commanders, spoke volumes. The weight of unspoken guilt stretched across borders. And in Alsace, the division deepened. Families of conscripted Alsatians demanded clemency for their sons, claiming they had no choice. Survivors from Oradour cried betrayal. The nation itself was caught between justice and unity. Why Oradour? Why this village? Some historians argue that the massacre was a case of mistaken identity, that the SS meant to target Oradour-sur-Glane, another town suspected of harboring resistance fighters. Others believe it was an act of sheer terror, a deliberate example to deter other villages from aiding the resistance. There's also the story of Helmut Kempfer, a German officer allegedly kidnapped by partisans near the area. His death may have triggered the rage of the SS, but even so, the scale and precision of the massacre suggest it was more than vengeance. It was a performance. Adolf Diekmann, the officer in charge, later died in combat. He was never tried for what happened. After the war, several members of the division were brought to trial in Bordeaux in 1953, but the proceedings were fraught with controversy. Many defendants received lenient sentences, others were acquitted. For the survivors of Oradour, justice was elusive. Today, Oradour-sur-Glane remains exactly as the SS left it. A new village was built nearby, but the ruins stand preserved. As you walk its streets, you see bicycles still leaning against rusted railings, bed springs twisted by fire, schoolbooks turned to ash, the melted facade of the town's clock tower. There is no sound, no laughter, only the crunch of gravel underfoot and the heavy silence of absence. There are no proper graves for many of the victims, only scattered memorials. A glass case holds a scorched doll. Another, a child's shoe. These remnants, mute as they are, speak louder than any voice. To remember Oradour is not just to revisit the past, it is to confront the darkest capacity of man. To walk through Oradour is to step into a wound that never healed. But the site does not ask for pity, it demands reflection. Children visit and leave behind drawings and letters. Some write, "We will remember you." Others say, "This must never happen again." Every stone in Oradour carries weight, not just the memory of who died, but a warning of what indifference can allow. Historians still study the massacre. New evidence surfaces, declassified documents, photographs, eyewitness notes. Yet no file, no photo, no transcript can fully explain why. Perhaps the point is not to understand, but to remember. In the ruins of Oradour, the world is held still, caught between past and present, echo and silence. And in that silence we are all asked a question. What kind of world do we choose to build when the dust finally settles? There are stories in history that inform us, others that inspire us, and then there are those that disturb us, because they show us how quickly normality can be extinguished. Oradour-sur-Glane was a peaceful village. It posed no threat, it made no demands, it simply existed. And yet in a single day it was erased. In the long shadow of war, the ruins of Oradour remain a testimony, not just to cruelty, but to the importance of remembrance, because forgetting would be worse.